Yes, right here on Salam Media, your home of humanitarian journalism, with myself, Salailo Makwidiri. It's time for a hashtag Africa Focus feature, where we put a spotlight on some of the most pressing stories on the continent. Our second story this hour takes us to Sudan, where the United Nations is warning that the risk of genocide remains very high as the war between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, as they are commonly known, continues to spiral. The UN says ethnically targeted attacks, especially in cities like Darfur and Kordofan, are ongoing, with communities like the Zagwa, Masalit, and Fur facing some of the worst violence. And to help us understand the unfolding crisis, we're joined now by Sudanese journalist Saeed Abdalla, who's been closely monitoring developments on the ground and speaking to those directly impacted by the violence. Saeed, good morning. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on Salam Media.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you for having me. We really appreciate that Salam Media is focusing in Sudan and giving some attention in what's going on in Sudan. And that's in a time that's like there's a lack of media attention from other media industries. We really appreciate that. Thank you.
No, the pleasure is all ours. I think Sudan is a pressing issue, especially for us here on the continent of Africa, and it definitely cannot be ignored. I think we can kickstart the conversation with what's the latest on the ground when it comes to Sudan. The UN is warning and is raising a red flag of a potential genocide unfolding. Can you give us a bit more insight on that and paint a picture for our listeners on the true and lived realities of the people of Sudan at this current moment?
In the latest months, we saw that the battles on the ground moved from the central and the east central of Sudan towards the west of the country. And that is exactly after the army, Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, announced an outright against in the capital Khartoum, and that came up in the central of the country, and that now we are seeing the battles move towards the west, especially of in Kordofan and in Darfur. In Kordofan, in the west Kordofan, and as well as in Darfur, like where Al-Fashir, as you mentioned earlier, and the battles are getting are getting worse and worse, and that's also worse than the humanitarian disaster in Sudan. And as just yesterday, we saw the report. We saw the report from the WHO that 40 children were killed in the hospital in Al-Mujlad, where in West Kordofan, that the RSF blamed staff bombing these hospitals. So it's the war is still going on. That we just saw that lack of attention. I think the world now is busy with what's going on in Iran, what's going on in the last few days between Iran and Israel, in addition to what was going on in Gaza. So I think the Sudanese war is not a priority to the world at the moment, and even though this crisis is still going on, the humanitarian disaster is still remain a catastrophe. And yeah, that's the latest from Sudan.
I think one of the concerns in recent months when it comes to the war in Sudan is the potential of the instability of the fighting spilling over into neighboring countries and ultimately conflict ensuing there. Can you tell us a bit about that? How does the spread of fighting into neighboring countries affect and make part of this conflict in Sudan?
Yeah, indeed. The Sudan's conflict regional crisis, triggering refugee waves, fueling armed conflict, spillovers, undermining trade and food security as well, and complicating diplomacy as well. And that destabilized vital global commerce routes in that part of in the eastern part of Africa. Now, with the wars has been going on for 2 months, for 2 years, more than 2 years, I mean, like, and we really do believe that without concerted international response and streamlining humanitarian aid and durable ceasefire and regional dialogue, that these consequences or this effect on the region there will only deepen and potentially will be plunging the Horn of Africa and surrounding regions into further turmoil. So we saw that there's more than 12 million Sudanese refugees in and out of the country. Most of them they went to the neighboring countries, Chad, South Sudan, and Uganda, countries like Eritrea, Ethiopia. Some of them went to Egypt. So all of these countries are now suffering from the influx of refugees and lack of services and lack of humanitarian aid as well. So the idea is if you don't stop the war, then the crisis will only deepen, and not only is going to be inside the countries, but like in the neighboring countries as well. And that also give us the message that it will never be a military solution for this crisis. It should be more diplomatic, more like a peaceful resolution. And that's for the Sudanese people and for the international community to unite and just find a political path and find a peaceful for this crisis, because it only gets worse and it's so far and it's never get better.
Mm, 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 we've heard of disturbing reports of ethnically motivated attacks, especially against the Zagwa, the Masalit, and Fur communities. What more can you tell us about the nature of these attacks and who's exactly carrying them out?
This is a consequence for this war. There's two warring parties. These two warring parties, they have their own militias and their own armed groups that's fighting with them. So with the RSF now controlling the west part of the region, the RSF came from Janjaweed, where that's made early in the 2000s. Mainly came from the Arab tribes in Darfur, and if you look at the demographic in Sudan and the population there, the racial groups are very complicated with some African and some Arab root tribes. So it was there were already some kind of tension between these groups earlier in the Sudanese history. This war came like after these two warring parties are trying to mobilize the war and just try to bring these kind of traditional leaders and tribal leaders to come to join. I mean, like each and every one of these like armed groups or whatever, like the warring parties. This has worsened the tension between these groups and causes. We saw that earlier at the beginning of this war, the genocide against Masalit that committed by the RSF, and we are seeing that in different parts of Sudan. In Sudan we have more than 500 tribes and small groups and minorities. If you don't take this into consideration, if you don't take that diversity and managing it in the right way, that's the consequences you get, like more like genocide and oppression against some groups against the others. So the only way that to solve this, you have to bring all these people together and find a way that for them to live together, and not to fight against each other.
Mm, 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 Very, very important, and I think a concerning picture that you're painting. Is there any sense of protection for these communities, or are they effectively defenseless in these attacks and in this conflict generally?
What we saw earlier is that those groups and some of those tribes are trying to just weaponize, so to have weapons and trying to have get ready for this, and we saw that the attack, it comes from uh, at any time from different groups as well. So, but the problem is you cannot defend yourself if you against troops or against the kind of militias that's been like on the ground and professional and for a long time, and you take the guns or take like very simple weapons and trying to protect yourself against those people. So the only way that people now that are trying just to just leave their home and just becomes refugees. This is one part. The other part is like some of these groups try to get into deals with let's say, for example, like if you live under the RSF control areas or live under the staff control areas, you just try and get into a deal with this group in order just to live peacefully. Most of the cases with RSF did not work, and we also saw some incidents with the Sudanese armed forces as well. So the issue is if you don't if you don't find if you don't get to a ceasefire, a real ceasefire, and then start it with to deal with the humanitarian crisis. I mean, and open some corridor for the humanitarian aid. This situation, it's a terrible consequences of this war.
Mm, And I want to touch on that, the humanitarian collapse aspect of this conflict. I mean, there's been reports of over 13 million people in Sudan that have been displaced, with 4 million fleeing the country itself and spilling over to some of the neighboring countries. What's the humanitarian situation like now, especially for those still inside Sudan? Are there any functioning aid corridors or safe zones that are left, or has the violence made humanitarian access almost impossible? I mean, we talk about Gaza and how there's a blockade on humanitarian aid for months now because of the Israeli regime's blockade in that part of the world. But
Mm,
something similar is unfolding right here at home, right here on our doorstep.
mm. Yeah, Sudanese are about 51 million people, and this they have been devastated. The consequences for them have been devastating. Tens of thousands are reportedly dead. Hundreds of thousands face famine, as well as the about almost 13 million people have been displaced. 4 million of those to neighboring countries. So there's famine issue. There's some kind of a spread of cholera. We saw there are lack of services of water, electricity, and health services, and as well as the problem with shelter in the raining season, and the problem with all these kind of humanitarian needs. When it comes to the humanitarian aid that comes from the international community, now this is a different matter as well, because we saw that there's lack of humanitarian aid that comes from the international community. I think due to this, there are two factors here. These factors are like one of them. These countries are started to minimize the aid due to some sort of local dynamic issues or local issues in their countries, and as well as there are like multiple conflicts now in the world. So these also other conflicts are taking some of these resources of aid. The second factor here, all even with the amount of aid that gets to Sudan, these two warring parties are trying to just also take aid as a weaponize this aid and try. Uh, you end up like the aid that gets to the people on the ground are like so little, so minimum, and with that, it's a matter of like there's no real kind of deal like how the aid can get to those people, and when it gets it end up like it's very little, and it's not enough for the need for the people. So without a ceasefire, and then you get to the point to the humanitarian aid where you find a way that you put people on the ground that monitor the process of distributing aid, and you get to a deal with these two warring factions that to reassure and to confirm that the aid will get to the people in need. I think it's just going to be fragmented in this way.
Mm, no, definitely. And just looking forward, what do you think our listeners, people from across the world, need to know and understand about this conflict in Sudan? And what's your view when it comes to the international community's response? Do you think there's been enough pressure being put, particularly on the RSF and some of its reported backers?
Uh, Unfortunately, when it comes to the international community, I think they just look at this conflict, and I'm sure that they say like, it's another war in Africa, it's another
Mm,
conflict between African people, and it's just we get used to this, and it's not important for us. So it becomes at the lowest in the lowest of the hierarchy of conflicts and disasters in the world, even though the humanitarian disaster in Sudan, when you combine the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and Ukraine, the Sudanese crisis are even more worse than that. And it's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world at the moment. And without taking it serious, it's only going to affect the region and affect the continent here. Uh, if the international community, when I mean the international community, I mean these big countries as well as the neighboring and these neighboring countries as well. Like if we stop this kind uh, of shopping around forums about Sudan and find just fragmented solution like what we saw in different multiple countries, uh, that's not going to solve the issue in Sudan. To solve the issue, you need to unite all these initiatives coming from the international community, whether from the regional countries like Egypt, Chad, the Gulf countries, or whether from the US and the European Union or China, etc. These kind of international efforts should come under one umbrella, and I think the best institution can do that is the AU. If we can just organize such an a peaceful agreement under the AU, and we call all these two warring parties to the negotiating table with some pressure from the international community. I think only in this way we can get to a peaceful resolution and a long-standing peace agreement. Without put some attention on Sudan and unite all these initiatives, and for this even for the stakeholders to come also to an agreement between them about what about Sudan. I think we only just going to see this kind of fragile peace agreement or fragile solutions. in order to get to a solid solution, all of these elements should come together and bring solution, not only for the Sudanese people, but it's going to benefit the whole region there.
Mm, 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 mm. There was an attempt by Sudan to bring a case against the United Arab Emirates at the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, for allegedly supporting the RSF. That case was thrown out. What's the response to that, especially from people inside Sudan? How are they interpreting the state of affairs?
Talking about that, I think in every, like we saw that in every war. This, in Sudan now, like these two warring factors or warring parties, they do have their own back supporters from the region. The UAE is supporting the RSF now in Sudan, and they, as well as Egypt and certain countries like Turkey, are supporting the staff. So each and every one of them, they have their own international supporters. And what I'm saying is, like, if you don't bring these stakeholders, the UAE, the Saudi, the Egyptian, the Turkish, all together, and just to, in order just to get to an agreement between them first, then you come to the local dynamic of this conflict and bring all these factors as well together. You are not going to get to that from, but you're only going to see like more support from these countries towards these factions, and it's not going to benefit the people. In order to deal with this crisis, you should go to the root of the root causes of this war, and not only try to just label one country or one region, and etc. There are some blames on those countries that's interfering in the Sudanese issue, but this is not the whole story. The whole story, like, we should, in order to stop that, you should, like, this is how the world is working at the moment. You should get to an agreement with all these countries, and just like to find a way that you can let these people live in live a peaceful life, because it's been more than 2 years, and we tried all this way, we tried this way of solutions by just only blaming one. The Sudanese war is very complicated. Let's just get to the root cause of this problem, and not only try and focus in one aspect of the problem.
No, definitely, Saeed. I think we're going to leave it here for now. We'll definitely be keeping in touch with you as the situation in Sudan continues to unfold. And as you mentioned, Sudan, very, very important, for us here on the continent of Africa. And I think if we are going to silence the guns on the continent, Sudan is definitely one of the first places we should start. So, yeah, really appreciate your insights and really appreciate you being our eyes and ears down in Sudan. That was Sudanese journalist Saeed Abdalla helping us unpack the deepening crisis in Sudan, where the United Nations is warning that there's a risk of genocide, and that risk remains dangerously high. And it's really interesting that as the world looks elsewhere, which is granted, it's human nature, and there's so much that is happening in the world. But millions and millions of Sudanese continue to face displacement. They continue to face death and despair, and their pleas for justice and protection grow more urgent by the day. We'll continue to keep a close eye on the story and bring you the voices that matter. This has been our hashtag Africa Focus feature. We're focusing on the top stories in and around the continent that you and I, especially those that are here in South Africa, in the continent of Africa, need to know about. There are more top stories coming up after this short break. We'll see you on the flip side.